Guys, welcome back to another video. Let's talk some more PlayStation 5 Pro, because as we got over the last week or so, we got all of the leaked specs for the PS5 Pro, exactly what is going to be under the hood running these games, and the reason why people would want to go out and purchase an upgraded mid-generation refresh. It's been a very weird generation, I would say, from the actual output we've seen from the current consoles on the market. The PS5 and the Xbox Series X, I think when they were first announced and we heard everything that was under the hood, a lot of people were very excited. It was a much better starting point this generation compared to where the PS4 and the Xbox One started last generation. And I think people expected that these consoles would last almost the entire generation if the developers were going to utilize everything, utilize all the tools, and make sure that the games ran as good as they could on the consoles. Now, we really haven't seen that. There are a lot of things that people still want. There's a lot of games that just aren't utilizing all of the features that are available, like the FSR that we've really only seen a few games use. I think RoboCop was the first game to actually use FSR 3 on the Xbox console. So all of these things just have not been happening, which has led people to have a lot more to be desired when it comes to the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. Now, you have to admit, so far this generation, most games, the majority of games have had a performance mode. The majority of games have been able to run at higher frame rates than 30 FPS. The stability of them, that's a different question depending on the game that is there. But when it comes to 30 FPS versus 60 FPS, whenever people see these big AAA games not having that performance mode or being locked at 30 FPS on the console, it is something that really causes a lot of discussion and disappointment amongst gamers. And we're starting to see more of that as more games do come out. I mean, Dragon's Dogma 2 is around the corner, and from what we have seen so far is that it is not going to be very stable. You're not going to be getting 60 frames per second on the console. That's going to be one of the biggest games released this year. So it makes you ask the question going forward to the next few years before this generation ends, is this really what's going to be happening with major AAA games? And is a Pro console needed to alleviate some of those concerns and alleviate the performance issues that some of these major games potentially will have? And that's where the PS5 Pro comes in, as we did get the leaked specs, and now we can kind of understand here how much of a jump this is actually going to be from the original PlayStation 5. Now, this is a spec analysis here from Digital Foundry, and they go through a lot of stuff here. I'm not going to read through the entire thing because it is very long, and there's a lot of just discussion here that doesn't give you the true answer that you're looking for. Because I know the question here is, what will these specs do? Will it give solid 60 frames per second across all games, especially with a game like GTA 6. So here are the specs, and you can see the differences between the PS5 Pro and the PlayStation 5. The major differences to highlight here would be the teraflops in the GPUs. The PS5 Pro is going to have a much more powerful GPU, 33.5 teraflops versus the 10.23 teraflops with the PlayStation 5. Now, of course, teraflops is just one small part that makes the engine run, that gives you these games running properly. And a lot of people just focus on that, but it doesn't determine the actual performance of these games. If you remember with the PS5 and the Series X, it was like 12 teraflops versus the 10 teraflops, and Xbox Series X being more powerful. People thought that was going to give it such a huge boost over the PS5, and that clearly has not been the case. PS5 has had games run better on it. Series X has had games run better on it. It all comes down to the optimization from the developers, and then also the other pieces within the console itself. Now, the CPU, this is the other major thing here that needs to be looked at, because this is the thing that isn't getting a very big upgrade. It's getting a 10% boost over the original PS5, where it's the exact same CPU, 8-core, 16-thread Zen 2 processor at 3.5 gigahertz, but that can be boosted up to 3.85 gigahertz, whereas on the PlayStation 5, it can only go up to 3.5, which equates to a 10% boost over the OG PS5. And this is kind of where it gets interesting, because it makes you question, what is the point of this PS5 Pro console? And Digital Foundry does an analysis here of the Zen 2, of the CPU, and explains that if you're expecting to get the PS5 Pro and then just have this seamless 60 frames per second experience on all of your games that release for it, that's not going to be the case. And especially if you were thinking that GTA 6 is going to have a perfect 60 frames per second mode on the PS5. Because of the PlayStation 5 Pro, that most likely will not be the case. So here's what they say. This is the headline point that may disappoint many. The AMD Jaguar CPU cores in the last generation consoles were replaced with Zen 2 in the PS5 and Xbox Series hardware. And we're essentially looking at a 4 times performance multiplier there. This opened the door to cross-gen titles that ran at 30 frames per second on the PlayStation 4, running at 60 frames per second or even 120 frames per second on the PS5. However, as cross-gen becomes a thing of the past, we are seeing more and more titles hitting CPU limits. Say our investigation of the AMD 4800S desktop kit built on the exact CPU used in the Xbox Series X reveals that the processor is way behind the capabilities of today's mid-range PC CPU. So right there, that is the bottleneck with these consoles. It is the CPUs, and with the PS5 Pro, with these specs that have been leaked, if these do end up being 100% true, they're not doing enough here to upgrade that to give that consistent 60 FPS with all of these major AAA games that are coming out. They say PlayStation 5 Pro sticks with the Zen 2 but offers developers the ability to run at a capped 3.85 GHz clock speed as opposed to 3.5 cap on the standard PS5. Similar to the existing machine, the Pro appears to operate with strict power limits, adjusting CPU and GPU clock speeds within a predetermined power budget. Activating the 10% speed increase means the clock speeds on the GPU decrease by a circa of 1.5%, leading to a 1% performance hit, according to Sony. And they say in the PlayStation 5 Pro, the CPU gained a 33% increase in the CPU power with no impacts to the GPU performance at all. And that here, I think, is a huge highlight as to when you look at what happened last generation, they released these consoles far underpowered compared to what we have seen this generation. Well, yes, right now these consoles are far underpowered to mid and high end PCs, or at least the high end PCs, but they still started off in a good spot where that jump from a base console to the Pro console isn't going to be nearly as big because they still need to make these consoles affordable and they still need to make them convenient for the buyer to want to go out there and actually pick them up. They can't be like $1,000 consoles. No matter how much people want that, it's just never anything that we've really seen here on the console market. So unless somebody's coming in here and completely trying to change the game when it comes to consoles, maybe the next generation, from the rumors we've heard, there's going to be an at-home Xbox console and a handheld hybrid Xbox console. Maybe that at-home home console for Xbox will be very expensive, knowing that it's just appealing to a very, very niche market. So that's the issue here, is that jump from the PS5 to the PS5 Pro, at least on the CPU side, is not nearly enough to destroy some of these bottlenecks that these CPU games or these CPU limited games are running into. And they, again, 33% from PS4 to the PS4 Pro. And they say the kind of gain you would expect from a new silicon process node. And that's because, as they say here, brand new silicon process. They say the fact that the PS5 Pro is compromising in comparison does seem to suggest that Sony is doing the best it can with the 6 nanometer process. In real terms, those hoping that PS5 Pro will turn CPU limited 30 frames per second titles into super smooth 60 frames per second experiences will be disappointed. With that said, the 3.85 GHz mode will bring greater stability to 30 FPS games that may not be hitting their frame rate target when CPU limited. And they say, and yes, we have started to see those titles. And if the 1% impact to GPU performance is verified, that's not really an issue in the age of dynamic resolution scaling. There'll be an imperceptible reduction in rendering resolution, and that's it. If the game is CPU limited, the GPU will stall and will lose far more performance anyway. So this thing being CPU limited kind of scratches your head and asks, what is the point? Is it just for slightly higher quality? Is it just for potentially better ray tracing? Because they do mention in their specs that you can get improved ray tracing 2 times to 4 times faster than the PlayStation 5. The other thing that I think will make this console somewhat interesting is the machine learning, the DLSS stuff that they are going to be putting in there, the specific tools that PlayStation has built for the PS5 Pro, the PlayStation Spectral Resolution, which they are saying is aiming to deliver results of the resolutions taking 1080p that can be upscaled to a convincing looking 4K which is something that is going to be very important going forward for the next gen, is the software within these consoles. I think that's going to be as important as the actual hardware under the hood, where they can actually utilize this software to give that next generation experience, while at the same time being able to put in hardware that is powerful but keeps the console affordable, because that is always the key when it comes to consoles. They can't be $1,000+ or again, at least they haven't been $1,000+ and to do that, all of this new software stuff that these companies are developing is going to be the key to giving better performance for these more taxing games in the future. So I think that's going to be kind of cool to see how this technology works and their machine learning, how it does help these games overall. But if people are expecting the PS5 Pro to come out and just destroy any bottlenecks, destroy any of these CPU limited games where there's no problem, they're all going to get 60 frames per second, like Dragon's Dogma 2 will be running a 60 FPS, no problem on the PS5 Pro. I think that isn't going to be the case. And again, you have to ask yourself, why is this thing coming out there? They make a very good point in this article at the bottom where they mention that these things are years and years in development. These things, the decisions, the investments as to whether they are releasing a pro console happened years ago, and the market may have changed. The things may have changed since they decided to invest in developing in their R&D for a PlayStation 5 Pro, but they are continuing going through with the actual development and release of the console itself. So we should be expecting to see a PlayStation 5 Pro announcement this year, with a release this year. We don't know the price. I'm guessing it's going to be at a minimum $600, like $599 release price is what I'm assuming the PS5 Pro is going to hit. And we'll see how many people actually pick this up, and if this is something that does truly end up moving the needle and how games perform because of the software inside of it more so than the actual hardware itself. But if you do want to check out this whole thing, go check it out and read it for yourself, because there is a lot of interesting information in here. But when we first read the PS5 Pro specs, you're looking at the GPU compute units and the teraflops, and it looks like it's a big jump. But then they announce that the CPU, or they show off that the CPU is essentially going to be the same with a 10% boost. Makes you scratch your head a little bit as to who this console is going to be for. But I'm going to end the video there, guys. If you did enjoy this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up. If you are new here, hit that subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.